Hello YouTube, Sidekick here, back in my Su-25 Grach, or Frogfoot. We're just going to do a quick power-up taxi, takeoff, and landing today. The startup is actually quite a bit simpler than the fully clickable cockpit aircraft. You just have to turn the power on, which we've done, and then one at a time start the engine. So we're starting the right engine. I think you have to start the right engine first in the Su-25. You can hear it spooling up. And there's a little light on the right-hand side of the cockpit, a little sort of cyan-colored light that came on when we started the engine. Now it's gone off. So now we start the left engine. We get a light for the left engine. We'll wait for it to go off. And at that point, we'll have all the engines started. So now that it seems like it's spooling up, probably almost time to close the cockpit. All right, the left engine is still spooling up. I'm just going to pause the video. We'll take a quick look at the instruments in the Su-25 cockpit. Let's start up near the top left. We have an airspeed indicator in kilometers per hour. Below that, we have an altimeter in meters, and then below that, we have a radar altimeter, also in meters. To the left of those instruments, we have a dial that's a combined angle of attack on the left and a G meter on the right. And then below that, we have a mechanical configuration indicator that shows flaps, two different positions, gear up or down, and also speed brakes on or off. Now moving to the right of the first column of instruments that we talked about, we have the artificial horizon and the pitch ladder. Below that, we have a horizontal situation indicator and also compass. Next over from that, we have a vertical speed indicator, which I find is an invaluable instrument in the Su-25. We have the aircraft clock. And the next column of instruments, we have a Mach meter. And then we have, start with the engine instruments. We have the engine RPM indicator. And to the right of that, we have the fuel gauges. And that's probably all we need to take a look at now for our basic. Okay, let's take it off pause and get ready to taxi. I find the aircraft starts moving somewhere around the high 50s, low 60% power. Requires something around 60% to keep it moving. Bear in mind that in the Su-25, the tow brakes are not bound. On my Warthog HOTAS, it's the paddle switch that is the brakes for both brakes. So we'll just take the first taxiway here. Contrary to instructions, we're not going to take runway 7, we're going to take runway 25. You do have to remember when steering that, like a lot of other aircraft, the nose wheel is pretty far back. It does affect where the turn sort of starts. It's also a caster wheel, which I find a little bit tricky to steer with once you get going quickly, as we'll see when we do the takeoff roll. Just pause here to take a quick look and get out on the runway. So the takeoff procedure is pretty simple. Brakes on, flaps down, and push the power up and release the brakes at around 80%. The rotate is around 240 kilometers an hour. So we'll see how that works out. So you can see how far back the nose wheel is there. And it has a pretty short wheelbase, so it does get a little bit squirrely when it gets going fast and you try to steer with the nose wheel. So you have to be pretty light on the rudder. It's a little bit more like taking off in a tail dragger warbird than some jets. Not quite as squirrely as that. So power up, brakes off, and off we go. See, there's a little bit of weaving going on. It's just something I'm probably going to get better at as I practice. And there's the rotate. And we're off. Gear up. Now, the Grok does have a real tendency to nose up strongly when you take off. And you have to, that's why we're getting a little bit of oscillations here as I'm pushing back against that until we get the flaps up. Now the flaps are up, that's settled down. We're pushing the speed up to cruising, which is around 600 kilometers an hour. Okay, so we're just going to come up here and take a nice gentle turn. Start with a 30-degree turn. Bank in. Need a little bit of rudder. Don't actually need very much back pressure. I'm actually climbing because I put any back stick in at all. Don't need a lot of power to keep the speed up. Just a fraction as the turn progresses. Overall, it stays in that turn really nicely. Okay, now we're going to pull the bank up a little bit more to say 45, see how she behaves in a slightly tighter turn. Once again, a little bit of rudder, not all that much. Don't really need a lot of back stick. Need a little bit more power to keep the speed up, especially after we've been in the turn for almost 90 degrees. But overall, pretty well behaved through all of that. So next we're going to roll out, and we're just going to go up a bit. We're not really doing a circuit here. Just at this stage while I'm landing. It doesn't seem to be standard procedure in the Su-25 to use the brake turn method of doing a circuit. That seems to be fairly common, at least in Western Air Forces. I don't know if it's what the Russians do or not, but it isn't described in the manual. So we're just going to do a quick climb, see how it climbs. You can see that we're holding about a 25 degree climb without much trouble, not really losing any airspeed doing that. Now we're going to level out, and we're just going to go downwind here a ways and take a nice long final, so we have a fairly relaxed landing. At this point, I'm still getting used to flying the Su-25, so I appreciate having a little bit longer to sort myself out. So as you can see, we're holding altitude here at 2,200 meters, no problem. Speeds come back to about 500, and now I'm pulling it back. I'm going to pull it back to idle and see how we do in basically an idle dive. I'm going to try and keep the speed there at around 500. As you can see, we get nose down a little to keep 500 in a dive, but nothing extreme. I actually do find that the Su-25 holds its speed reasonably well in a glide. Now, the same might not be true if we were carrying a lot of ordnance, and so this may be just indicative of the fact that the airplane is designed to carry about 2 tons or more than it's carrying right now, so it's pretty well behaved when it's clean. Okay, so we're coming down, we're going to level out, and we're going to see how our speed bleeds off. Ultimately, when we get lined up on final, the first speed we need to be worried about is about 400 kilometers an hour. That's our flaps and gear speed, so we want to be close to that as we're turning in our distant base leg here. One thing I certainly have discovered in flying the Su-25 for a little while, you definitely want to cheat to the high side in terms of speed. You don't want to get behind the power curve in this aircraft. The flight performance gets decidedly mushy once you get down around 300 kilometers an hour. So it's important on approach to keep the speed up until the very end on final. So we're turning on our long base leg here. You can see the airfield down there. We're under 400, so we'll be able to use the flaps once we get lined up. Overall pretty docile at this point. Like I said, we got lots of time to line ourselves up. So you can see the airspeed needle's approaching that yellow arrow, which is 350 knots, which is kind of, 350 kilometers an hour, which I think is pretty much where you want to be on final until the very short final when you start bringing the speed back under 300 for touchdown. Now, one thing about the Su-25, if you're used to Western fighters, especially modern fighters and Navy fighters, the landing approach is much more kind of a standard approach, and maybe one that would be more typical of a warbird. You fly in at a fairly nose-down angle, aiming at the runway at your aim point, and you rotate, and then you float down the runway and make contact with the runway, rather than the kind of angle on-speed AOA approach where you fly straight down to the end of the runway at a constant angle of attack and basically do a controlled crash at the end of the runway. The Su-25 is built more in the traditional mode where you want to rotate and bleed off speed as you flare, and then touch down at somewhere around 240 kilometers an hour, which is where we took off. So as you can see, we're just keeping the runway there at the bottom of the glass, and we're getting the flaps down now. When you put the flaps down, the nose is going to pop up, and so we'll just try to push it down, keep it out of that balloon. So we're keeping an eye on that speed. We do want to get the speed down as we get closer to the runway. We'll get the gear down now. We'll probably find with flaps and gear that now our nose down attitude has increased, and now we got the runway, the aim point, more or less in the middle of the glass. And we're adding, we still haven't added a lot of power because we're still up above 300 kilometers an hour. And like I said, the aircraft does hold its speed pretty well, because we're still on idle. Yeah, we definitely want to be under 300 when we touch down, and I feel like we're a little bit high and a little bit fast, so we might just want to deploy the speed brakes here to really kill the speed, and we can compensate with power if that takes us down too low. Aim point's still pretty good, and it's just a matter of keeping on speed and on our aiming point. We're going to aim to rotate somewhere around the end of the runway and touchdown somewhere around the black mark. So now we get the speed brakes on. Now the speed's coming off. And there's the flare. And there's the touchdown. Now we definitely want to slow down with the parachute. Do not want to try and stop this aircraft only with its brakes. Discovered that early on. You do need the parachutes to slow down. So now, having slowed down, we can add just a little bit of power, keep the taxi speed up here, and we'll head to the taxiway just down the way, and we'll turn off the runway, and this will be our first flight, first sort of full circuit in the Su-25, takeoff and landing. I think it went pretty well. As I said, it doesn't handle badly. I think the base model is pretty nicely balanced. It glides well. It holds its speed well. The engines do require a little bit of anticipation to stay ahead of the power curve, but nothing that's unusual, I don't think, for a jet of this era. So overall, I think that was a pretty successful first flight. Now we're going to try and do a similar flight in the Su-25T in the next video.
Taxi to parking area.
It's a little bit different because it has the full HUD. We'll actually take a look at how you can use the navigation modes in the HUD in that next video. But we'll also find that it's a little bit more of a handful, I think, particularly to land, because it doesn't like low speeds quite as much as the base model. But that'll be a topic for the next video. Hope you enjoyed this one. Please like and subscribe. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.